Chapter 7. The Chitin Symphony. Dust, thick and fine as powdered bone, filled the crater and air, a shroud over the living and the dead. It tasted of burnt metal and vaporized earth. For a long moment there was only the sound of ragged breathing and the high, thin whine of overloaded audio sensors. Jaren was the first to stir. The hand he'd clamped on Spark's shoulder remained, a point of stillness against Waisoki's trembling frame. He released his grip. The trembling in the Waisoki's frame was a familiar ghost, a pale echo of the terror that had consumed his own world. He pushed it down, back into the forge of his discipline. Spark, released from Jaren's grip, stayed curled on the frozen ground. His mind had simply stopped calculating. Morral pushed himself to a sitting position, shaking his massive head. He spat a mouthful of grit. "Good hit," he rumbled to the bruised sky. A genuine, if absurd, compliment. The scale of the destruction was too vast for his linear mind to process as a defeat. It was simply a large event. Eve's optical sensors flickered back to life, running a rapid self-diagnostic. Air quality, hazardous. Visibility, 0. Auditory input, compromised. Guest status, alive. Significant distress. Her internal chronometer noted that 47 seconds had been lost to sensory overload. An unacceptable delay. The initial storm of debris subsided, the heaviest particles returning to the earth. The air remained thick with a choking haze, muting the sky to a dark, bruised orange, and then Jaren felt it. Not a sound, not a vibration, but a deep, discordant thrum vibrated up through the soles of his boots. "Incoming! From under!" Jaren rasped. The word choked off as the ground in the center of the crater convulsed. 4 fissures tore open, and from them erupted a skittering nightmare of dried blood chitin, their arrival a dry clatter of countless limbs. They were leaner and faster than the previous creatures, moving with a jerking, burrowing motion, spitting sprays of earth as they launched themselves at their victims. "Keep the line!" Jaren roared, the old command torn from a past life. "Do not fall back!" But there was no line. There was only chaos. One of the creatures was on him in a heartbeat, its weight a crushing blow. He drove his knife into its wriggling body, rewarded with a spray of acrid, green, hemolymphic vomit across his faceplate. The thing shrieked like tearing metal and began to dig. Its obsidian-tipped forelimbs found the seams of his armor, ripping through the reinforced fabric beneath. White-hot agony flared in his chest. The monster was burrowing toward his heart. Another creature latched onto Eve, its claws screeching as they failed to find purchase on her chrome chassis. It grappled her, its immense strength pinning her arms, triggering an alarm. "Warning! Unsolicited physical interaction!" Her combat subroutines screened for action, but her core programming fought back. This was an infestation, but it was touching her. A violation. A strange, cold fury began to overwrite her logic. Morral met his attacker with a cry that was more rockslide than voice. The creature leaped onto his chest, and the Vesk, rather than trying to pry it off, simply slammed his own body forward into the crater wall. There was a sickening crunch of carapace and a spray of green ichor. The monster, pulped, loosened its grip. Spark, seeing Jaren go down, fired a wild shot that glanced off the creature's carapace. His exocortex flared, a lattice of targeting data flooding his vision. But the frantic, skittering movements made a lock impossible. He was useless. "Hold still," Eve said, her voice devoid of emotion. Her processors had found a loophole. The creature was a sanitation issue, and it was preventing her from providing adequate service. Her arms, locked in the creature's grip, began to strain. The metal of her endoskeleton groaned as she applied slow, inexorable pressure, not to escape, but to pull. The sworn creature's limbs stretched, joints creaking under a force born of mechanical purpose. Morral felt the jarring impact of a fourth parasite locking onto his back, its limbs scrabbling for purchase with an unnerving rhythm, but his attention was fixed on Jaren's plate. The creature was digging deeper, blood welling up around its claws. With a roar of protective instinct, Morral leaped. He didn't use a weapon. He used himself. His full armored weight came down sideways on the creature, crushing it into a paste of shattered carapace and green slime. Jaren cried out as the pressure vanished, his body going limp. The world swam in a red haze. Spark's exocortex finally found its mark, a clean lock on the creature wrestling with Moreau. A single, precise laser blast cored through its head. Seeing Eve still locked in her grotesque tug-of-war, Moreau lumbered over, grabbed her attacker by its thrashing legs, and tore the thing in half. He threw the twitching pieces aside. Eve took 2 steps back and calmly resumed her firing stance at the crater's edge, as if she had merely been repositioned by a clumsy porter. Her internal processors logged the event. Sanitation issue, resolved. Guest safety, restored. Minor scuffing on left brachial actuator. Will require buffing. The abrupt quiet in the crater was pierced by a crackle of static. A new voice, frayed but resolute. Renoa is lost. Repeat, Renoa is lost. All SDF units fall back to the river. Destination is Fort Gallant. Do not, I repeat, do not use Highway A12. It is under orbital bombardment. Space, Dock 1. Impact zone is radioactive. Godspeed. The message repeated. A tinny ghost of their failed hopes. Jaren dragged himself to his feet, clutching his chest. Each breath was a fresh agony, air, a fire on the raw, gouged flesh beneath his armor. He could feel the ragged edges of the wound, a deep tearing that radiated pain with every heartbeat. He walled it off, packed it away. He could move. It was enough. They scrambled out of the crater and began the retreat. Jaren, fueled by a terrifying cocktail of shock and will, took the lead. Every step sent a fresh wave of fire through his chest, a pain he ruthlessly compartmentalized. He focused on the thrum of the planet, his mystic sense, a faint beacon in the storm of his own agony, guiding them. Eve followed, a silent chrome spotter, her sensors sweeping the horizon. Moreau brought up the rear as a walking fortress, with Spark trotting shamelessly in his shadow. They moved over the frozen, hilly ground, the distant screams of the swarm, a constant chorus at their backs. It was Jaren who stopped first, raising a hand. Ahead, the snow was churned and blackened, littered with the familiar, grotesque shapes of insectoid limbs. As they drew closer, the scale of the slaughter became apparent. A charnel heap of at least 10 swarm creatures, torn and blasted apart in a final, desperate stand. In the center of the carnage, a figure was propped against a rock, so caked in alien ichor and dark blood that it was nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding gore. Spark flinched, thinking it was just another body, but then a sound cut through the wind. A wet, rattling breath. The figure's head lifted, and they saw the Major's clear, defiant eye staring back at them from the ruin of his body. His lower half was a nightmare of shredded armor and spilled viscera, yet he held their gaze without flinching. "Good," he groaned, his gaze locking on Jaren. "The rat took my commands. Get to the fort. I'll take a few more with me." Moral stepped forward, his massive form casting a shadow over the dying Vesk. He tried to bellow his customary "Hurrah!" but the sound caught in his throat, a choked, half-hearted croak. The smell of offal was too thick. The Major's gaze shifted to the ichor on Morol's plate. "Got 3," Morol said, his voice low with a strange, somber pride. A faint, bloody smile touched the Major's lips. With a trembling hand, he unpinned a tarnished medal from his own chest and pressed it into Morol's gauntlet. "The armor, it remembers. Make it remember this," he grunted. "I got one." Spark peeped from behind Morol's leg. The Major's eyes slid past him, not even registering his existence. He began to hum a low, guttural dirge and started dragging himself back toward the sound of the distant enemy. They didn't watch him die. They fled. The flight hardened into a miserable, trudging rhythm, the memory of the Major, a ghost at their backs. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the crunch of snow underfoot and the sound of ragged breathing. The adrenaline that had sustained Jaren was failing. A damp, ominous warmth began to spread across his chest as blood seeped from his wound, staining the inside of his armor. Each step was a carefully negotiated truce with the agony that lanced through him. He could feel the cold starting to bite, not just at his exposed skin, but deep in his bones, a fatigue so profound it felt like a premonition. They crested a low hill, and Jaren froze. Ahead, half buried in a snowdrift, was the body of an SDF soldier. They approached with caution, Spark's paws clenched as he knelt by the corpse, his practiced eyes taking in the scene. The man's armor was shredded, not by energy weapons or shrapnel, but by something far more primal. Deep, parallel gouges were torn through the plasteel, and the body had been partially devoured. "A apex predator," Spark stammered, scrambling back and colliding with Morale's leg. "It's the big one." "Attention, valued guests," Eve's voice cut through the tense silence. "Please be advised that local wildlife can be unpredictable. For your safety, we strictly prohibit the feeding of wild animals." As she spoke, her optical sensors tracked a flicker of movement in the rocks above them. A low growl, like the sound of grinding stone, echoed across the snow. It was a creature of sculpted muscle and condensed fury, a feline predator the size of a hovercar. Its fur was the color of dirty snow, and its eyes burned with a cold blue light. It launched itself from the rocks, not with a leap, but as a cannonball of sinew and claw. Eve's rifle came up. Furthermore, the use of open flames in wilderness areas is discouraged. A bolt of laser fire, intensely hot, struck the creature in the shoulder. Its fur ignited, but its trajectory didn't waver. It was a meteor of burning hunger. Spark yelped and fumbled his rifle, nearly dropping it in the snow. The cat slammed into Eve, the impact throwing them both into a deep snowdrift. The android's chrome chassis disappeared under the thrashing, flaming beast. Morale thundered and charged forward to help, but Eve's voice, eerily calm, drifted up from the melee. "Please refrain from running in guest-accessible areas." She attempted to extricate herself, her movements calculated but futile against the beast's weight as its claws sent showers of sparks from her plating. Sharon raised his own rifle, a weapon meant for hunting things exactly like this. He fired, the shot striking the creature in the flank. It roared in pain and fury, but did not relent. Spark, recovering his nerve, squeezed off a shot of his own, but his trembling paws sent the beam wide, searing the snow inches from Morale's boot. Enraged, the cat turned its attention from the unyielding android to the charging Vesk. It swiped at Morale, its massive claws raking harmlessly across the Dreshklar plate with a shriek of tortured metal. Morale met the attack head-on, wrapping his arms around the beast's thick neck and beginning to wrestle it, a ferocious growl tearing from his own throat. The stalemate was broken by a final, decisive action. Eve, having extracted herself from the snow, ended her lecture. "Thank you for your cooperation." She leveled her rifle and fired a single, precise shot through the creature's eye. It went limp in Morale's grasp. The hiss of the creature's burning fur was extinguished by the snow, the sound replaced by the high-pitched panting of Spark's terror. Eve's head twitched, a shower of sparks erupting from a damaged coupling in her neck. "Customer service in this area," she stated, her voice crackling with static, "has been temporarily degraded due to technical difficulties." They wasted no time. Jaren stripped the dead soldier of his pack, liberating a few rations, serums, and drug patches, and a half-empty battery pack. His own armor systems had been flashing a low battery warning for some time. He then laid his hands on Moreau and Eve. He closed his eyes, murmuring prayers in a tongue only he understood, a communion with the spirits of his dead world. A faint warmth spread through them. For Moreau, it was a soothing balm against the raw, bleeding skin. For Eve, the sensation registered as a localized energy transfer, momentarily silencing the static fizz from her damaged neck coupling. It was a small miracle, one they felt despite their skepticism. Then, with a seasoned hunter's grim efficiency, he began to skin the dead cat, the motions of his knife sure and practiced. Spark watched, his nose twitching in disgust at the smell of wet fur and blood. Jaren worked with a desperate focus. The salvage battery pack was already flashing low, and he knew the shock keeping him upright wouldn't last forever. If he collapsed from his wounds, the hide, turned fur side in, would be the only thing between him and a frozen death. The march resumed, the sky turning a uniform, oppressive gray. The temperature began to rise, and a wet, heavy snow began to fall. Spark, already at the limits of his endurance, began to falter. He stumbled, his paws sinking into the rapidly deepening drifts. Eve stopped. Without a word, she unstrapped Spark's pack and rifle, slinging them over her own shoulders. "Guest is experiencing mobility issues. Providing assistance." Spark whined pitifully and shuffled on. 10 minutes later, he collapsed face first into the snow. Jaren knelt, his movements stiff, pulling out a health serum and administering the injection with the impersonal speed of a field medic. Any lapse in focus would let his own agony overwhelm him. Morrall, seeing the delay, began unbolting plates from his own leg armor. He grimaced, carefully packing the heavy plates into his rucksack. Abandoning the armor was unthinkable, but the improved mobility was a necessary sacrifice, even if it left his raw, chafed skin bleeding in the cold. They rested for 10 minutes, a shivering huddle in a world of white. Jaren refused to sit, knowing that if he stopped, he might never get up again. He remained standing, a grim sentinel swaying on his feet, the pain a living thing inside him, clawing to get out. He fought it back with venom. "Get up!" he snarled, his voice a raw rasp. "Death is coming. Are you going to lie down and make it easy for it?" His goading, curses that were more prayer than insult, got them moving again. The snow turned to sleet. Eve's joints began to clog with semi-frozen mud, her movements growing stiff. Then, through the swirling gray, they saw it. A dark line stretching across a vast white expanse. The Karachin Bridge. It was massive, a testament to an engineered optimism that now seemed obscene, spanning 1,000 feet of churning, half-frozen river. But it was jammed solid with abandoned vehicles. Jaren raised his comm. "This is Midnight Squad, approaching Karachin Bridge. Do not blow the bridge." The reply was a gruff bark. "Demolition is imminent. We can't stop the order. Hurry." Panic, cold and absolute, shattered the iron cage of Jaren's control. The pain in his chest exploded through his defenses, a nova of pure agony. Black spots danced in his vision. He saw them. Spark, a heap of fur, Morrall, bleeding, Eve seizing up. Dead weight. They were going to die here. He was going to die here. The thought was a physical blow. Before reason could catch him, his legs were moving. He ran, abandoning them to the ice, screaming useless orders into a wind that devoured the words. He reached the edge of the bridge, a chaotic maze of cars, and vaulted a guardrail. He was blissfully unaware of the new sound that had joined the wind's howl, a low, buzzing hum. The rest of the squad, watching from a distance, saw its source. From behind the silent, snow-dusted vehicles, jagged silhouettes lifted into the air. Flying insectoid creatures, their wings a blur of frantic energy, produced a menacing hum as they swarmed the man who had just run to his salvation or his doom.